Heading into another weekend, and we're kind of in between systems. There is some snow on the ground in the north central U.S. Let's take a closer look at that. We got one corridor going from eastern Colorado up through Des Moines and into Milwaukee, and a larger area of snow up in the Dakotas. The snow is also visible from the International Space Station. That's a look at Omaha, the Platte River in the bottom left, and the Missouri River going up to the top left. The surface map does show that we're in between systems. We've got one weather system near Boston, heading out into the Atlantic, the cold air advection coming back in behind it and really dropping those temperatures and bringing snow back into the northern Appalachians. Yesterday we had rain showers and a few thunderstorms. Huntington, West Virginia broke its record. I think they're right about here. They broke their rainfall record yesterday, 2.62 inches. And down in the southeastern U.S., rain down there as well, and a rather dramatic frontal passage from the Tallahassee Weather Service. As the sky lightens up, you can see that downdraft processes are dominant, and then we pick up that scud back behind the rain showers. So we are clearing out all that warmth and moisture out of western Florida, and the cold front continues to surge to the east. In the wake of that, a ridge extending from Texas up to Illinois. Colder up in the Midwest region, but rather mild down in Texas with lots of 40s and 50s. Pretty quiet in the southwestern states, but we can tell it's a little bit unsettled off the west coast because the pressures are a little bit low, and typically we see the intrusion of that Pacific high that we have right in this part of the diagram. So we've also got a indication of a cutoff low aloft. You can see that concentric pattern of thickness contours right there, and that indicates we're going to deal with another wave here off the Californian coast, and we'll look at that a little bit later. Heading up north, pretty quiet in the Pacific Northwest. Another front heads into the southeastern part of Alaska, and temperatures in southern Alaska rather mild. Got those 20s coming out, but still up along the north slope a lot of Arctic air, and that extends into Canada where we've seen it for weeks now. The coldest temperature this afternoon looks like minus 42, and I can see another minus 40 near western Baffin Island, and that marks the location of the Arctic air, just parked right there over the northern Hudson Bay region. And then heading south, some more cold air sweeping into the Canadian prairies, and a rather quiet day across Quebec, but yesterday they had some very warm conditions out there in the Maritimes. 58 degrees yesterday at Halifax Shearwater, breaking the record of 51 degrees. And Charlottetown in the Prince Edward Islands, located about right here, they reached 49, and that was just a tiny bit above the record set previously. Well, we're starting to deal with the Pacific again. This is a look at the integrated vapor transport. This is a measure of the potential for the atmosphere to produce flooding rains at any given point. And we see a plume coming up right along the coast of Hawaii, which is kind of buried right there. And they have had some flood warnings in parts of the Big Island right there. And you can definitely make out that that is going to be coming around anticyclonically in a clockwise fashion and should eventually reach the west coast in the next few days. And let's watch that take place. Very likely we're dealing with a strong EPO index. And we can see that going into Sunday and Monday, there's a plume heading into British Columbia and the Pacific Northwest. And then by Tuesday and Wednesday, that should shift down into Oregon and Northern California. And then it eventually peters out a little bit as we get into Wednesday and Thursday. So related to that, here's the precipitable water, and this is a measure of the total water vapor in a vertical column at any given point. If it was precipitated out, you would have a certain amount of rainfall, and that's what this measures. And we've got a scale at the very top. I don't know if you can read it, but that's calibrated in inches. So 1 inch, that's getting into the cyan colors, and then 2 inches is getting deep into the purple. And what we see here is a lot of dry air covering the country. So we haven't really seen this in a while. Much of the higher precipitable water has moved off the east coast. And of course, we're turning our sights westward towards this area right here. And let's watch it unfold. If you want to follow along at the bottom, this might be kind of hard to read, but that indicates the valid time. So we're looking at Saturday at 0Z, which is this evening about 7 p.m. Eastern. And we'll go ahead and bring that forward in 6-hour steps. There's the big influx of moisture right there, starting up off Vancouver Island. You're starting to see that cyan. That's the 1-inch precipitable water amounts. So we're up to Monday at 18Z, which is going to be around lunchtime on Monday. And the precipitation will be affecting the coast there, especially around places like Quileute, Astoria, and North Bend. And you can see that shifting down the coast. Don't see any really high amounts come inland, and that's a reflection of the northwestern origin. Typically, to get those flooding rains into California, we need to see a trajectory more out of the south. And we don't have that this time. So most of this is driven by storms coming from the Gulf of Alaska. And then we flip to our other concern, a large area of polar air. Doesn't look like this is particularly strong, but it is nosing in. This is going to be about Wednesday, and the fronts are going to be located like this. This is another way we can measure the moisture. This is the dew point at the surface. And I've got these in bands of green for 40s, yellows for 50s, orange for 60s, and purple for 70s. So quite a bit of moisture across Florida down into the southern Gulf of Mexico. Can make out the high pressure area there in the Atlantic. Also another high across Texas, up into Illinois where we have that ridge, and then the frontal system in between. So right now we've got this offshore component blowing into the Gulf, and that's going to push the moisture out to sea. But during the weekend we get some recovery. You can see those 50s trying to sneak into Texas on Sunday, and that primes the atmosphere for the next wave coming in from the west. And that appears to be probably about Wednesday where things are going to come together. Can see a little bit of interaction taking place right there. Convergence of westerly flow, that's either the cold front or the dry line, with deep tropical flow coming up from the Gulf. And this is all maritime tropical air. So let's take a look upstairs at the jet stream level, 300 millibars. There's that cutoff low off California and the main polar front jet running about like that, and then picking up across the Atlantic somewhat like that. We have long wave ridging out there in the Pacific and long wave troughing across much of the U.S. And you're going to see some of these small scale waves moving through the flow and just kind of modifying the pattern as they move through. There's one strong wave right down there in the Pacific, and part of it crosses over and flattens out the ridge out there around Alaska. And as that wave continues moving to the east, you can see the ridge rebound right there. This is a little program I threw together over the past couple of days. This illustrates the long waves and short waves. And what we have here, this part of the diagram, this is going to be the long waves. And you can see that there's this ridge built up like that, and then it turns into a trough here and here. So what this means is this part of the diagram is under the influence of a long wave trough. Here's another long wave trough right here. And then we have ridging located in this part of the diagram. Now what I've also got on here is short waves, and that's this stuff down here. And you can see that's made up of smaller wavelength ridges, smaller wavelength troughs, like that, and more ridges. You can see that they're not quite as elongated as the long waves. The long waves are long. The short waves are short. And I've got this set up to where the short waves are moving through the flow. So let's take a look at that and watch this happen. So here we've got a short wave trough moving through the flow. It hits that long wave ridge, and you can see the whole pattern flattening out right there. Then eventually that trough descends the backside of the ridge, and you can see it start to deepen as it gets into that trough. And that's kind of what's going on the west coast right now. So anyway, if you want to play with this, I've got this program set up for our Patreon subscribers. So just head into Patreon, and I'm going to have a announcement in there with a download link, and you can play around with this on your own. Here's a closer look at the thermal structure across North America. This is starting out right now. There's that frontal system on the east coast, and you can see the cold air advection coming back in behind. The purple is the potential temperature, and that's basically just isotherms reduced to a common level. Here's the new polar front, and then we got these Pacific systems moving through the flow, and those are set up something like that right there. And that's what's going to impact the West Coast. So let's run this forward and check out this area right there in the Pacific Northwest. So they're not going to have much of a reflection at the surface initially, but as we get into Monday and Tuesday, starting to see some troughing in here, troughiness, kind of like that, and eventually we start to see some of the hallmarks of a well-developed system. There it is right there across the Great Basin area for Tuesday night, and that's going to interact with this cold air coming out of Canada. So two systems kind of coming together right there, and eventually things move through the Rockies. There's our Pacific system in Utah for Wednesday, getting close to that Canadian air. And then eventually it does get out into the plains and kind of jumps very quickly into the Midwest for Thursday night. And that's it up there in the Great Lakes region. Cold air coming back in behind, and the cold conveyor belt working on Minnesota and Wisconsin. So more snow for them for Wednesday night and Thursday. And then some more cold air flowing into much of the country. 1041 millibar high. And looks like potentially another system coming together right there. That's going to be next weekend. Not this weekend, but next weekend. So we'll keep an eye on that. I was thinking about those temperature extreme maps. We haven't done those in a while, but there's not been much to report. It's been kind of a mild winter for much of the country. Tomorrow, not much going on. No records on Sunday. Monday. Tuesday, well, warm temperatures in Louisiana, 82 there at Monroe. Wednesday, yeah, we're seeing some heat, a mini heat wave across the southeastern U.S., temperatures close to 90 in Florida, and lots of 80s from Houston to Atlanta. And more heat for Thursday. These red values, those are breaking records for the date. So, yeah, lots of 80s across the southeastern U.S., and we've got the appearance of some unusually cold weather in the northwest, so that indicates some strong troughing in that area, and maybe some Arctic air seeping in from the north. Down to 23 at Seattle, and 22 at Portland. So not much going on today, but next week we'll be a little bit busy, and we'll watch this play out here on good old pivotal weather. Good for visualizing precipitation. So this weekend, lots of high pressure, but there's that cutoff low we were talking about kind of lurking off California, and typically those lows sit down there until a wave comes in from the northwest. That is, I believe, called Henry's Rule. So that's probably going to be that wave coming down on Monday or Tuesday. And there it is. You can see things starting to go downhill around Seattle and Portland, snow in the mountains, and that precipitation field really expands as we get into Tuesday. And now we're starting to see that cutoff low opening up just a little bit and developing a precip field in Old Mexico. As we get into Wednesday, very stormy across the central part of the Rockies, right in there, and looks like that wave is pulling out from Mexico and interacting with some of that deep tropical moisture from the Gulf, and possibly we get an MCS during the day on Wednesday affecting parts of the Arklatex area. We still got the main Pacific system back here. That's probably going to come through dry. You can already see strong downslope out ahead of the system, so the dry line may be pushing a little bit towards the east. And that may shut down the precipitation chances going into Thursday. Eventually, as these waves push eastward, we get the cold air advection flowing back in through the central plains. In the northeastern U.S., mixed precip across much of New York and Michigan and into southern Ontario and Quebec. And, of course, the cold conveyor belt precip, the calm ahead, affecting the UP of Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota for late next week. And looks like it's still unsettled out to the west, and we'll have to wait till next week to analyze those details in a more reliable fashion. And just touching base with the National Drought Monitor, still a lot of problems there in the Central Plains and in the Great Basin area in California as well. So even those rains we got back in December and January, those, I guess they did not really help all that much. But fortunately, maybe that Pacific storm track will be getting active once again, but no real problems out east. I was excited to get another look at that great footage from Greg Payne. Thank you very much for providing that. That's a look at US 90. That's one of the two main highways that connects San Antonio with El Paso. So enjoy that footage, and we'll see everybody back here on Monday for the supporters and Wednesday for everybody else. Hope you have a great weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.